night or dead or night. Whoa!
We're going to devote our energies to sports and gardening, all the cultural pursuits as far as they're concerned. In fact, we're going to put the goons to sleep. Meanwhile, we dig.
Greetings and welcome to the Anadromist. This is Byrne Power coming to you from Tbilisi, Georgia on a pretty warm but nice summer day here. It's early July and been thinking about a lot of different things, and I've been thinking about why I believe in God. So that's going to be the subject of this kind of rambling talk. It'll last at least a half hour, maybe an hour at tops. I doubt it'll go much beyond that, because what could be said about God any more than an hour's worth? Why do I want to do this? I want to do this because I get the feeling there are some people who watch the channel who would be genuinely curious as to why I believe in God. And I think some of the reasons might be predictable, and some will be a bit surprising. We'll see. Before I get going here, let me just remind you that the channel needs love and help. I don't make any money on anything. Whenever you see me using a clip from a movie, even if I did get monetized, which I'm not expecting to because of a host of situations, including living on the edge of civilization here in Tbilisi, Georgia. All those clips and stuff get me copywritten so someone else would take the money. So if you enjoy this channel, subscribe, leave a comment, ask a question about God, or you can tell me why you don't believe in God. It doesn't matter. We're here to talk and to understand each other. So let's begin. What's interesting is that whenever Jordan Peterson is asked this question, he finds a way to dodge it, and he will say things like, well, what do you mean by believe? And what do you mean by God? Well, I don't have any such hesitancy, because I have a pretty good idea of what I mean by believe and a pretty good idea of what I mean by God. And hopefully it in some way corresponds to true belief and the true God. And that is my hope and prayer. So, what does it mean that I believe in God? Why would I believe in God? Well, first of all, and this is, I think, the question Jordan Peterson gets hung up on, is, what do you mean by believe? And I'm sure there are many different ways we could characterize belief. But I'm just going to point to three. I think these are the three that leap to people's minds without even really thinking about it. The first is that belief in God, for many people, it's essentially intellectual assent. It's like them saying, I think a God could exist, therefore I believe in God. I believe that God exists. That is not what I mean by why I believe in God. I just assume God exists, and I'll get to why, but I don't spend a lot of time trying to prove it, because to me it's evident. What's also evident is that we have a barrage of media formats which come at you from all sides. And I notice that people's belief in God has become even stranger and more abstract with the arrival of the internet and then social media. So I've talked about these kinds of things in other places, so I'm not going to go too much over that. But let me just say this. I will talk a little bit about proof that God exists, because I do believe faith is both an act of stepping into the dark, and it is an act of rationality as well, of reason. So the second way people tend to use the phrase belief in God is as some sort of leap in the dark, stepping off a cliff, stepping into a dark pool at midnight. Kierkegaard was good for these sorts of things. And I understand where he's coming from. He is coming from a Christian position. He knows what he's doing. Many of the people who use this kind of leap in the dark, faith is a leap in the dark kind of thing, I think they use that just as that's the way they believe in everything. It's a leap in the dark. They don't know why they do anything they do. There have to be some whys. It can't be, and I'm pretty sure Kierkegaard would say that. It's not simply that you just believe, because there are a lot of things one could just simply believe. But I don't believe it. And finally, what comes close to my definition is that we often use words like belief, trust, faith, kind of confidence in, kind of interchangeably. And some people then, so I trust in God is probably the way I use the word belief. Belief as trust. Now, sometimes when I've said this, I've noticed that people react. Because trust is what they have in a friend. Trust is what they have in institutions or don't have. But trust in God, again, I think they are not believing in God. If they have a belief in God, it's on this intellectual assent level. Yes, the proof is there. I think I believe in God. And the other people, it's like God is, something in the void, something in the dark. And how could you trust that? Whereas I think if you can only get to the heart of belief if you begin to understand trust, which we'll talk about a little bit more as we go. Okay, a word about proof. A lot of times people get hung up on this. And in fact, there's a whole stream of Christian thinking that seeks to prove that God exists. And I understand why they do it, because we are surrounded by people who say, well, look at science. God doesn't exist. We weighed and measured the universe. We didn't find God. How could God exist? And this was what started to happen in the Enlightenment in the 18th century, is this idea that we figured it out. We know what the world is like. God can't exist in it because he cannot be weighed and measured. Where I think the evidence for God's existence is literally everywhere. And I'm not saying that just to be kind of spacey about it. Anyone who knows me well knows I am the opposite of a person who's just like, oh, everything is beautiful, God is everywhere. I don't think it like that. But I think the evidence is all around us. And I also think we are really good at hiding it from our own eyes. So let's talk about this problem, as long as we're mentioning proof and, does God exist kind of questions. One of the problems with this whole weighing and measuring thing that I think the scientists and philosophers of the early Enlightenment got hooked in was that they bound God to the material world. And evidently they didn't read the Bible very carefully, because the Bible clearly says God is not within the material world in the same way he would be in a pantheistic notion of God. That is to say, this world we live in is God's creation. And God inhabits it, but he also inhabits many other things and is beyond everything. He isn't the same as the chair I'm sitting in, the light up on the hanging from the ceiling. This is one of the ways people get trapped, is there is a verse that says God is light, and then they immediately picture the light or the sun or something like that, and so God is light takes on this physical matter energy definition. Whereas that God is light isn't that kind of, it isn't brightness. Because you know what? There's another verse in Psalms that talks about the darkness around God's throne. And there is a mystery. There is a darkness to God. God doesn't reveal himself instantly. You can't just go, show me God, and God goes, pow, you exist. Or I exist. And in fact, I often tend to think that this world is a test to see whether we can actually have faith. So here's my thought about God and space. That when the early scientists, Copernicus, Galileo, Tycho Brahe, von Leeuwenhoek, Francis Bacon, Newton, all of these very interesting characters, most of whom I believe were Christians. I'm pretty sure of all except one of them, but even he seems to have been a bit of a Christian. They didn't ask whether God exists. They weren't weighing and measuring things. They were weighing and measuring things, but they just said, oh, this is really fascinating. If you weigh a chair and put a person in it, it gets heavier. That's really interesting. We didn't know that, and we can do calculations on where the stars are, the position of the planets, the way they move. That was really fascinating. So they started putting everything into this weighing and measuring kind of idea in the Renaissance. It was later that these things began to be interpreted in a certain way. That is, that the ultimate reality was matter. And that reality did not seem to include divinity. It was simply, as Hans Rickmacher says, it's just stuff, and more stuff. But it's really hard, and you hit your head against it. So where is God in this picture? Well, I think what they did was they left out a very key element in their scientific research that wouldn't be really discovered again until the early 20th century. And when you mention it, it suddenly seems, well, that's really obvious. But these things often happen like that. There's something that is really obvious gets left out in the midst of something else. When people get excited about one thing, they may forget about something they've already got. And I think that's what happened with God and space. So it's interesting. You'll hear people today say things like, well, the universe really wanted me to come here, and they'll say it like, the universe really wanted me to get this parking spot. The universe really wanted me to take this journey, to come to Europe, to do this. And I'm sitting there going like, what do you mean the universe? If everything is just matter, as a good atheist would say, that it's all matter and energy, and it's all can be explained through scientific theories, then what's this universe thing wanting anything? Isn't that just another way of saying basically God wants me to? But by using the word universe, you don't have any responsibilities attached to that, except for, we need to keep the planet clean and stuff like that. But you don't really have a universe wanting anything, in that if matter is all there is, if this kind of materialistic idea of science is all there is. But that's not all there is. The thing they left out was time. And what do I mean by that? Well, actually, they got really fascinated with time. Galileo was really fascinated with pendulums. People got fascinated. They said, we got this clock now. Let's put some second hands on it. Let's measure things with the second hand. Eventually, it would go to, nanoseconds, and they'd just be measuring everything. The hummingbird's wings beat at so many kilometers. What would it be? Kilometers a second? I don't know. Miles per second? No. Inches? Anyway, you get what I'm saying. so many beats per hour. They would weigh these things, but that isn't time. The measurement of time is not the same thing as time. And that's where they got really, the early scientists had no problem with this because they lived in time. They lived in a world which was not nearly as full as ours of things and distractions. Their world was, if you went to Florence in the 14th or 15th century, it would seem to you like a village. Things moved slowly. They lived in time. There were festivals, and the calendar was very important, and there was a saint's day here, and Christmas was coming, and that's all part of time. They were more familiar with death than many people in the West are, where we try to hide death. In America, we have this to the point of being a pathology, that we keep death out of our view. And if you understand death, you begin to understand time. And I have met death on several occasions very closely, and I can tell you, it changes your perspective. But suddenly, time is really important. My mother died back in 2015, without going into the whole story, which is really complex and painful. I will just say this. I understood time much better when I was done. And suddenly my life says, oh yeah, I'm going to die. I was about 60 years old when she died. And I said, yeah, that's not many more years left. I mean, yeah, it could be 30 more years. It could be 10 more years. I'll be 69 this year. But what do these years matter? It's how you live within it. What is time? Time isn't the duration of, say, an hour. That's the measurement of time. Time is the thing happening in between. And here's the thing they left out. What happens in between is the living, is the passage of everything through time. And guess what? It happens differently, not only for every human being, or for every animal, or for every plant, or for every rock, or for every planet, or every sun, but it also happens differently for every cell, and every atom, and every subatomic particle. And eventually, as we discovered in the 20th century, you get down to the bottom and you get these little weird things called, gluons and quarks and all this stuff. And the really mysterious thing, I've often heard people say, well, you're just atoms and you could all just fall apart. How do we know I'm different than this lamp here? That's or the chair. Maybe you're just going to fade back into it. And this is what happens when an idiot goes to science class, gets a materialistic view of the universe, and says, it all doesn't matter, man. We're all just atoms. I'm kind of channeling many people influenced by kind of hippie philosophies at this point. It's just like, man, it's just like, once you realize that, it doesn't matter anymore. We're all just going to fade into everything. To which I'm sitting there going like, so what you're saying is the whole substructure, the whole structure of the universe is based upon little itty-bitty things. And that we're just made up of little itty-bitty things. And those little itty-bitty things don't really mean much. And there's no God. They're just little itty-bitty things and big things, and they're just things. But to me, what's interesting is when you get down, at every point, when you get down, all the way to the bottom, the really fascinating thing is what's at the bottom of everything isn't little itty-bitty things. It's little itty-bitty things swirling around each other in relationship to each other. Do you get what I'm saying? The bottom isn't the thing, it's the relationship. Or, as is said in information theory, the smallest unit of matter, comes from bit, the smallest unit of information. So that the information already has to be there. Where did it come from? Did it just, even if you go back to the Big Bang, Was the information just tagging along, or was the information the motivator? Do you get what I'm saying? So to me, everything is based upon relationships. So if you look around the world today and you say to yourself, what's the problem in politics? Bad relationships. What's the problem with ourselves and tourism, which is becoming more and more of a nightmare as people travel to hellish places that should have been beautiful, but people describe them like pornography, and then they ended up going there, thousands of millions of people to one place. And they wonder why no one can see the Mona Lisa, and why you can't see this beach in Thailand anymore without about 40 people wanting to get the same selfie. Bad relationships, or why there's a gyre of plastic in the middle of the North Pacific Ocean. Bad relationships. Bad relationships with nature, bad relationships with animals, bad relationships with each other. And then the people who say, we want to clean it all up, and then come up with some authoritarian version of how to do that, more bad relationships. So that's the thing. Interestingly enough, time is so important to everything. Without time, there is no meaning, because time presupposes movement. And without time, there is no movement, there is no relationships. It would all be like a photograph. Not that it could be. Because space, the things, the objects, the material world is really important. If you've also been listening to me, I've been saying this for a while. But we need to get these things, time and space, back together. The internet doesn't help us there, unfortunately. It can help people find each other, and then in the real material world, enact real solid relationships in time. Meanwhile, the abstractions go on and on. I've dealt with this at much more depth. But the point is this. If relationship, not matter, is the core to the universe, well, one thing I'm not going to discuss is why I'm a Christian. I'm just talking about why I believe in God. But I would like to say this. It's interesting, if you go to the very first sentences of Genesis, it says, in the beginning, God created the world. And God said, that's very important, let us make all this stuff. But the point is, there's a word there. It didn't just simply come from a series of chaotic relationships, but that word being spoken was very important. If you go to the first chapter of the Gospel of John, it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Now what's really interesting is that word is logos, which has a lot of baggage connected with it, and different people interpret it differently. I'm not going to go into all those interpretations because I don't know them all. There are so many. But I will just say this. One thing that says is that a word presupposes a listener. Not so crudely as that. That is to say, I don't think God's in space with a big ear. And this is one of the problems. We also anthropomorphize God. And make God, when a person who doesn't believe there is a God wants to laugh at a person who believes in God, he says, you really believe in a man in the sky? To which I go like, what are you talking about? You have no idea what you're saying. That isn't the image presented in the Bible, nor is that the image presented in life. But here's the thing, is that we live in time. All of our relationships are in time. And guess what? We relate to God in time. In this personal sense of time. That everything is in a different relationship to each other. That each person's relationship with God is different. Yet, there is a commonality to all of it. There is a truth. There is meaning. And in fact, words like truth, beauty, love, joy, peace, all of those things only have meaning if time is real. And by time is real, I mean not just a sidebar to space. but something that is meaningful, that we live within it, as we live in space. But you know what? We all know we do, but we live in a time and a culture that's trying to destroy the effects of time. We need to go faster, we need to get this done quicker, we need more people to go here, we need more convenience. You know, I could go on. And where the rubber meets the road is, we want our relationships like that too. So we want to hook up, sounds like trains backing up in a freight yard. We want to not be committed. Commitment is the time element of love. So can you say you have, you know, if two people are, shall we say, experiencing some sort of physical relationship with each other, is it love if there is no commitment? And if there's no commitment, is there any meaning to the action? So to get back to the idea of believing and trusting. So here's the thing. One of the reasons, like I said, that people react to that kind of language is because they immediately think about people. Well, isn't that funny? They think of themselves and other beings and whether they can trust this person or not. I have a rule that I made after I came up with this idea of time back in the 90s, that when I meet someone, they're at 0. I don't dislike them, I don't like them. Now, of course, we get visual cues. If a person comes up to you and they've been living on the street and they smell, you'll get some cues from your scent and the dirt that you see. Not that those prove anything, but it will tell you, at least on some level, this person has a problem with their hygiene. Also, when I meet someone, I talk to them a bit, and then if I can find out that I can talk to them, they go up in that area. But I don't know anything about them and money. So, you know, maybe I can have a really great conversation with someone, but I shouldn't really ask them if I'm in trouble to borrow money from them, because they are a different kind of person then. So in other words, there are all these areas. You don't know what makes a person angry, what makes a person greedy, what makes a person lustful, or what makes a person really trustworthy. It takes time to do this. Now, I've got a whole time series, and I'm not going to go into it all here, but if you're interested more in these ideas of time, do go back and find the series on time and memory that I did. But what I want to say is this. We build our trust based on the time spent with people. We shouldn't love anyone we haven't spent time with, or time in some way. You know, for instance, you could say, well, a mother just loves her child. Yeah, after 9 months in the womb. After feeling the first little movement in the body, suddenly it's like, oh no, this isn't more of me. This is someone else coming. A relationship is already formed. We need to trust. So my relationship to God is such that it's based on trust. What do I mean? Well, I never believed in anything until I was 15 years old. I didn't believe in God, but I did not believe in God. I just simply drifted, as I assume many people do in this rather confusing world. But of course, this was further back in time, and so I didn't have all of the audio-visual digital distractions that we do today. So I could go out and play in the hills. I could go to the local cemetery or the local quarry. I could walk around through the town. I could drive my bicycle to the next town. And all of these things were just actions that I took. Of course, I had to trust that I could ride a bicycle. So I had to know that I was good enough. But, you know, I figured that out. So, but I became a Christian without going into an elaborate explanation. I started to believe in God as a result of becoming a Christian. Partly because I already knew that there had to be real goodness in the world, and that the evil was really bad, and this is because of the family I grew up in. that I could see both things. That people had the possibility of real beauty and goodness, and that they chose often to be more selfish. So when someone came up to me and started to talk with me about God, at first I was like, "What? I don't want to know about this." I knew the guy who told me about Jesus at first was this guy I knew he did a lot of drugs and stuff, and I was like, "You think you know about God?" I mean, I knew enough to throw God's name around, but the truth is, I kind of knew God already was there. And the more I heard the story of Christ, the crucifixion, the resurrection, his message and such, I already said, oh, well, this has to fit with the world I already know. Because you see, up until the age of 15, the world was a really dark place. But like I said, I always knew there was goodness. And once I slotted in these bits of information that God made the world to be good, but we chose to take it a different way, that God had to do something else, those bits of information, I was like, well, of course, now this makes sense. Why was this kept from me? But when I became a Christian, when I started to believe in God, everything changed. The year before I became a Christian, I was getting F's in school because nothing mattered. I didn't have any reason for anything. I had kind of vague hopes. I was interested in things. But even then, within a year, I was getting nearly straight A's. Why? Suddenly the world had meaning, and here's the great thing, everything corresponded to it. Both the dark and the light. Because you see, in time, not only do we get truth, but we also get lies. And interestingly enough, Jesus is always warning about the liars and the charlatans and the fakes. He's always warning about the religious people who think they know everything. And all of that just resonated as like, yeah, I trust this. This is the world I live in. And whenever I hear people talking about, many people say, well, how can you believe in God when these Christians do X? I'm going like, you see something there that I don't? Because all of that is pretty much normal. Because everyone is a hypocrite. Once you get that fact, now the whole point is to be astounded that anyone isn't. And then you go, oh, two people are shaking hands on the street. That's a great thing. They could be stabbing each other. To assume the goodness and then to say, oh, I can't believe it. The world is so dark. That's the problem with people who believe in too much positive thinking and too much romantic optimism. Then they get really shattered when they discover the truth. And the truth, believe me, is dark. I mean, I've seen it. And it's something that I think, see, at that point, I became a Christian, the world started to have meaning, my first point of trust. You see, I stepped up onto a different place, and the world was the way it was. It hasn't changed since then. There have been mistakes. Our Jesus People group started to act cultish. Well, it really wasn't a surprise because, again, the temptations are always there. They're all mentioned in the Bible, all sorts of temptations. So when you look back on it, it's just, you say to yourself, why were we so stupid as to do that? And then you start looking at historical things. You go, okay, we entered this world and this is where we find ourselves. But I had a friend once, a friend named Matt. We were walking down the street. Now, Matt is hardcore atheist. Comes from Texas. And he says, Byrne, now can you just explain to me why you believe there's a God? And I said, Matt, it's because I feel pain when I hear of a child being molested by their parents. If the world was just matter, and relationships don't matter, and everything here is just a fluke somehow showed up here, it's like a spore, but where did the spore come from? It's like some sort of cancer, but where did the cancer come from? On reality, if that's what it really is, then why would that matter at all? Why not just simply be more brutal than the animals? You know? But the fact that something like that causes such pain, not only in me, but in most people who hear it. Not all, because there are people who have given in to their selfish fears and their selfish instincts or whatever. People who have violated themselves. But even those people really know it. They just may not be able to change their habits because their habits have scarred them to the pit of their soul. Nevertheless, I do believe in redemption. So for me, there have been different moments where I saw, for instance, our group was becoming more of a cult-like. And I saw I needed to leave. I couldn't articulate what I just said to you. But I said, I need to go somewhere where I can have better discussions. And the only place I knew was L'Abri in Switzerland. I left America in 1978 with about, I don't know, maybe $1,500, not even. Bought a plane ticket one way. I had no idea when I was coming back. You know what? One of the best decisions I ever made in my life. Not that everyone who does such a thing is making a good decision. Au contraire. No, that's the whole point, is that the relationship is big. Okay, what's faith? One thing I've discovered about faith is that, and this is never, at big moments when I've had to make changes, I've never seen it fail that if I move from California to New York, a big moment of change, something happens when I first get there that causes the floor to fall out from under me. And it did. But I lived 16 years in New York. When I moved to Alaska, something happened when I first got there to cause the floor to fall out from under me. And I lived 22 years there. When I went traveling to explore the world of puppets in 2005, I broke my wrist the week before. And I had to go get it worked on and get a cast. Did that stop me? No, because I felt what I was doing was something I would be hard-pressed to explain to you, certainly in this place, why I felt God was working there. But I knew it. And so I stepped out. Now and the same thing happened moving to Georgia. Now where does faith and the act of faith come from? Many people will say that faith, they'll quote the line in Hebrews that says faith is the evidence of things not seen. Not realizing that what that section is doing is describing what faith gives you. It gives you the evidence of things not seen. So, when I moved into each of these new places, that I felt in my heart, this was where I should be going. All the evidence was pointing this way. I didn't simply find a map and throw a dart at it and say, ooh, I'm going to Alaska. Ooh, I'm going to Georgia. No. It came from a buildup of small increments of changes that had happened, things that had happened, and I said, okay, this seems to be the next step. So, here's the interesting thing. There is a verse in James that says, faith without works is dead. Christians argue about this all the time. Well, if you have works, then you're not believing. Whereas I just sit there and go like, no, it's not like that. The work is you're proving that you have faith. It isn't, you don't just say, I believe, and then you go on with your life and act as if you didn't. So if I say, I believe God wants me to go from New York City to Alaska. Well, if I don't do anything to prepare, that is stupid for one thing, and it has nothing to do with faith. It's just me being presumptuous. So in order for me to know whether I should go to Alaska or not, I had to prepare. I left a year before. With my reason and logic, narrowed it down to Southeast Alaska. I said, no, I don't want to be in the middle of I don't want to be in the Arctic Ocean. Don't want to be in the middle of the state, which is super cold. Don't want to be near where the earthquake was. Don't want to be near where the oil slick was. Southeast Alaska. And as I'm traveling on the ferry in Southeast Alaska, in 3 weeks, I'm going to 5 different towns, and I'm spending a while in each looking for the place. And as I start traveling, and I tell people on the ferry, a great way to travel, by the way, tell people on the ferry what I'm doing, they say things to me like, oh, you should go to Haines. Oh, you should go to Haines. They have a radio station in Haines. You should go work there, etc. And then I get to Haines. Now, when people tell you things like that, you're like, yeah, right, okay, I'll see when I get there. I get there, and it's like, oh, this is where I should be. These people actually were voices coming in, and I think from God. Again, I can't prove this, but the proof is in the relationship. You see, it's not in the material substance. It's not like someone comes up, gives me all this money and says, here's a ticket to go to Alaska, here's a ticket to go to Georgia, here's a ticket to go back and get your stuff. No, I have to work at it. And so you could say, well, you just got lucky, or you just had enough willpower. No. You're not inside me. You don't feel what's pushing me. So trust, it's very similar to trusting people. There are people I have known, there's a few people I've known since, there's at least one person in my life I've known since 1970. Another one's a few more in 71. That's a lot of time, and I have an idea about these people, Now, again, some of them I've been separated from for a long time. Hi, Keith. But nevertheless, there's something I know about these people. I don't know the story in between, but the very fact that this person gets in touch with me tells me there is a story in between. Faith is essentially trust. Trust comes from time and relationship. We meet God in time. Now, I do think we meet God in space as well. But as the old theologians used to say, there's enough of God in nature to condemn us, but not to save us. Meaning, when you go into nature, you'll have that moment. I've had this many times. I've walked through the middle of a forest in Alaska many times in the middle of winter. And I've had that experience. It's just like, it's almost like a chill, what the French call a frisson. Kind of like goose flesh. You just know something's here. But it doesn't have any words. It's just images. It's just a feeling. Whereas the relationships are different. And in fact, one of the most interesting clues to the existence of God is the existence of us. Meaning, we have personhood. Now, how could my personhood, my ability, for instance, people often say, well, the ultimate thing is numbers. And that's science. At the bottom, it's about numbers and being able to weigh and measure things. I'm sitting there going like, and do you see those numbers anywhere sitting around? They're not. They're coming out of this, and it's not coming out of one of these. It's coming out of millions of them that we're looking and we're counting. And we're doing something with that, and eventually we're able to send someone to the moon. So, I think that, I was just thinking today, if you were to take, say, many modern people, modernist type people, and postmodernists, think that if you had a camera and a recorder, and you could just record and audio record everything, you'd really know something. So there are people who make movies. There's certain kind of modernist films where things just happen, and we're sitting here on the outside trying to guess what it is. Whereas, in fact, what it is indeed, it is just the surface. Reality isn't the sum total of what you can weigh and measure. It isn't just the words that we speak to each other. For instance, reality, the reality God has given us, includes an interior. Numbers are part of the interior. They are not on the surface. No coyote has ever sat there and come up with a trigonometry equation that we know of. You always have to say that for people because like, we never know. Yeah, we do. Don't act stupid, But that's part of the problem of the postmodern mindset is always like, well, how do you know? It's just, you just look around you, Your dog looks up at you and goes like, yeah, what do you want? And it doesn't understand you. Whereas you write books about dog behavior. Well, not you, but somebody does. So, I believe in God because I trust in God because over time, at each, one could look at the more micro level. One could do it as a fractal and look at my relationship on a day-by-day level. That wouldn't be interesting. But basically, when the big moments came, things worked out. How do I know they worked out? Because of my relationships with you out there. I mean, just the whole thing that I went through with the trying to raise the money for that thing, even though in the end it was a difficult thing that didn't quite work out. Nevertheless, when I look back on it, I say, I built relationships with people through this. I did need to go to Alaska when I did. I was able to get the most important things from my library here. If God wants me to get the rest, God will allow that to happen. It's not up to me to make it happen, but certainly I will put the effort in. The works of faith, the works without which faith is dead, are the actions you would take based on the fact that you have trust. Let me just say it again. The works of faith are, and there are many other ways of defining this, but I'm not going to go into liturgy and ritual and all of that. But the works of faith are the things you do as a result of trust that you wouldn't do if you did not have that trust. And the only way I can tell you to find that is you kind of have to find God and you kind of have to lean back into Him and start to ask Him to prove Himself. Not in a crazy way, not in a leap of dark in the dark way. It's a leap in the dark, but it's kind of like I already know where I'm going. You see? Although I can't see it. I couldn't see my move to Alaska before I got there. I couldn't see my move to Georgia before I got here. I couldn't see my journey into the puppet theaters of Europe before I did it. All of those things have radically changed my life, and for the better. So, I'm getting older, but life is full of meaning. The clock hasn't sped up. It has, in fact, slowed down. But at the same time, since the reality of death is there, I feel like, okay, I have to be responsible for all the time I've got. And as I said in my recent video about what one of the main motivations behind my starting the channels has been to be responsible for what I've been given. There are many things I haven't been given in life. Not a lot of money. I don't know it. Do I know any rich people? I don't know. What do I have? Evidently, I have a brain. I have a serious amount of creativity. And I have the ability to put ideas together. And I've known about this since I was at least 20 years old. And ever since then, I have been responsible for those things. Not perfectly, that's for sure. And there's one thing we shouldn't forget in all of this. Why do I believe in God? Well, the one thing I want to say is there is a big thing in the way. It is the fact that we do evil. And as I told you about my friend Matt, evil is a serious problem. And you have to have some sort of belief structure that accounts for it. And I find it always interesting. There will be people who say, like, how could a good God allow the Holocaust? How could a good God allow, all sorts of terrible things to happen, murders and wars and deaths. I mean, wrongful deaths. And it's interesting that we don't ask the following question. How could God allow me to throw this plastic bottle on the ground? How could God allow me to throw this cigarette butt on the ground? I don't smoke, but still. I'm sure nobody who throws a cigarette butt on the ground ever stops and asks, how could God allow this to happen? How could God allow me to get angry at, my friend, my son, my mother? How could God allow X and X and X? Because you're free. And each of these relationships reverberates. So one person in Germany in the middle of the 20th century can choose something that eventually affects the whole world in a bad way. That's how. Because these things aren't coming from outer space, although I do believe in a spiritual world. But these things aren't, I don't think that's the source. The source is in ourselves of the evil. So what often keeps us from believing in God are all the lies and delusions we tell ourselves. And I think it's pretty much as simple as that, and pretty much as dark and deep as that. And I think the lies and delusions we tell ourselves are also responsible for all the most hideous things that people have done. But again, I do believe in redemption, but I'm not going to talk about why I am a Christian. Not now. At some point in the future, I probably will, if this seems to go well. Okay, so I don't know. Did this do anything for you? Did you get anything out of this? If you did, leave a comment. If you have questions of clarification, if you want to just challenge me and say, well, I really don't believe you about this or that, go ahead. There's no one I won't talk to about these things. If you just want to be snarky and goofy and stupid, I don't need that comment, because that goes nowhere. The person who would just make a mockery of something is not the kind of person, you see, it's a bad relationship. So, well, this is Byrne. It's nighttime. I'm alone. There's a puppet hanging over there. Got a poster of Come and See Idi Ismotri, the great Russian war film that is about the darkest things in humanity. I've got my puppet library. Got a little glass of liquid here. Life is meaningful. It all has meaning. We make things that are low in meaning. Things like a McDonald's cup. But what's interesting about that is, most of the time it's low in meaning. Yeah, you can drink out of it and then throw it away. And you see where the time element gets distorted there. It's just there for a moment and it's not there as a work of even the most minimal kind of art. But I could imagine a place where the most important thing you could ever discover is a McDonald's cup. And that is, you need to fill something up. You need to fill up a cup of water because you haven't had any water for a couple of days and you're almost on the verge of death, and you need a cup to hold water or some other liquid. So the meaning can be there, but so nothing is absolutely meaningless. Although the McDonald's cup is pretty good. We make things that can be meaningless. It is the goal of our sad commercial world, where we can take beautiful things and turn them into dust and garbage. Dust is nice, garbage not so much. Okay, well, I think I'm going to stop right now. And remember, support the channel, support the cause. Well, the only cause is meaning and love. And, if you don't know if you have a relationship with God, you should work on that. From Tbilisi, Georgia, this is Byrne saying, Drobit, temporarily. We will meet again.
A people without history is not redeemed from time. for history is a pattern of timeless moments.